Hello, and welcome to another episode of Meet the Professor at Martin Luther University College. My name is Kristine Lund, and I am a professor in spiritual care and psychotherapy. I have some other roles here too. I'm the assistant principal with administrative responsibilities for the PhD in human relationships that has two fields, one in spiritual care and psychotherapy, and the other in pastoral leadership, and also the Master of Arts in theology, spiritual care, and psychotherapy. It's kind of a mouthful, isn't it? What it basically means is I oversee these programs and engage with students who have questions about entering and look after courses, faculty, etc. You might ask, how did I get to Luther? Well, it's been an interesting process. I was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, to immigrant parents, and that actually is an important part of my story, because for my parents who came from Norway and from Wales, education was vitally important, because as immigrants, it was something that they were limited in their ability to access it after high school. And so when I finished high school, there was no doubt in my mind or in my parents' mind that I would go on to university. And so I was accepted into the University of Calgary. And because I thought I wanted to be a medical doctor, I began with a major in microbiology. And while I enjoyed my studies, as time went on, it became apparent to me that the dream of becoming a doctor was not my dream. It was my parents' dream. And so it took a while, probably a year, to grapple with the question of where did I want to focus my studies. But I'd been taking some psychology courses as electives, and they were catching my interest. And so I decided to change my major from microbiology to doing a Bachelor of Science in psychology. This wasn't an easy choice because I knew my parents would not be happy with it, and it turned out they weren't. But I knew within myself I needed to follow what I felt was important for me. So why do I share that with you? I share that with you as an encouragement to you as students or prospective students who maybe aren't sure about what you want to study, or maybe you've come to university with an idea of what you want to study, but then as you're here, things start to change and unfold. And so my encouragement to you would be to pay attention to what energizes you. What are the questions that are emerging for you? Where do you want to explore? How do you want to integrate your learning into the kind of life you're trying to create for yourself once you graduate from university? And it was, as it was for me, sometimes it is hard choices and hard decisions. But know that your academic advisors and other faculty members and your peers are also there to be supportive of you, to lean into that challenge. So ask for support, and I trust that you'll figure it out. Our courses at Luther are well positioned for you as students to be exploring those questions for yourself. So after my undergraduate degree, I came to the point of trying to figure out, okay, so what's next? I mean, I could get a job with my bachelor's degree at that point in time. We're talking quite a few years ago now. But I've always been an engaged learner and interested in things. And so I thought I would pursue the area of counseling. And so I applied for a couple of graduate programs, but I'd also became intrigued with theology and questions about God. And the church had always been a really nurturing and supportive place for me. And so I also applied to the Lutheran Seminary in Saskatoon. Lo and behold, I was accepted there and decided that I would go to do a Masters of Divinity degree with the expectations that I would want to work in the area of pastoral care, probably in a congregation, because I hadn't even considered about being a chaplain or spiritual care provider at that point. So off I went to Saskatoon for some of the most challenging and enjoyable 4 years. Immediately starting my degree studies, I began to grapple with some big questions and to have to face some of the ways I had understood my life and my beliefs about God and about the Bible and about what it meant to be a Christian in the world. And it was a challenging 4 years, but I had wonderful professors that were open to me coming by and sitting in their offices and grappling with those questions. And so those 4 years were a tremendous learning opportunity, sometimes very hard, but also very joyful. And actually, when the end came and I graduated, I cried because it had been such a good experience. And I was sad to leave because I had developed some really good relationships. During my time at seminary, I began to slowly begin to feel a call to become an ordained minister. And this was an interesting time in history because the church had just decided to ordain women. So I had no role models. I had no idea how that looked. And yet I felt like I was being called to that vocation. And so I was ordained into the Lutheran ministry and served 2 different rural parishes in Alberta. And I loved parish ministry, being with the people, engaging in the various aspects of their lives, weddings, funerals, journeying along them through births, through sadness, through times of happiness. In those 8 years of parish ministry, though, I discovered where I was really lacking in knowledge and experience to be able to support parishioners in facing the concerns that were happening in their lives. And so I began to think about going back for education. And interestingly enough, it was sort of like going back to where I had ended my undergraduate degree when I was looking at doing a graduate degree in counseling. And so as I pursued a further education opportunity, I began to do units of pastoral counseling education, which ultimately led me to be certified as a pastoral counselor and later a spiritual therapist with the Canadian Association of Spiritual Care. And so following that training, I began to work first in agencies and then in private practice as a psychotherapist, which then after a few years led me to seek further training to becoming a supervisor. So are you getting the picture that I'm kind of a lifelong learner? Because I am. I'm always followed by my curiosities, my questions, the possibilities that are presenting in my life. So as I worked as a clinical supervisor, then I was approached to do some teaching as an adjunct professor at a couple of theological colleges in Edmonton, where I was living at the time, which then led me to be asked to come on staff as the program coordinator for a degree at St. Stephen's College, a United Church Theological College in Edmonton. Interestingly enough, once I took that position, then it became apparent I needed to get a doctoral degree in order to maintain that position. So I began thinking, okay, what interests me? What questions are arising that I would like to research? And one thing that fascinated me, which came out of my own learning, was how do therapists learn to be present with their clients? In that, I mean, how do you use what's happening in the moment to support a client's healing and change process? And I had kind of figured that out for myself as a professional, but as a supervisor, I began to have questions about how as a supervisor do I support a student to learn that? And so that was the focus of my doctoral research. How do pastoral counseling students learn to be present with their clients? And again, it was a fascinating doctoral project that I loved to the very end and still am curious about, and actually still informs my teaching and learning to this day. So I finished my doctoral degree in 2004 at the University of Alberta, and wouldn't you know, about 7 weeks later, I got a call from Waterloo Lutheran Seminary. Would I apply for a position there? So I hummed and hawed, but ultimately decided to do so. And I guess it's clear that I got the position. And in 2005, I came to Waterloo Lutheran Seminary, which now has become Martin Luther University College, and began to be a professor here. This year, my administrative duties will be increasing as I am serving in the role of interim principal dean until April 30th, 2021, unless they find a principal dean earlier, at which time I'll return to my normal duties as a professor in spiritual care and psychotherapy. I'm also the clinical director at the Delton Glebe Counselling Centre in Waterloo, which is a community resource that has been an outgrowth of Luther. At the Glebe Centre, we have clients from all the post-secondary institutions in Kitchener-Waterloo, as well as the broader community. The Glebe Centre has professional therapists, and it's also a clinical site placement for students in our MA and PhD programs, for social work students from Laurier, and art therapy students from Toronto Art Therapy Institute. If you want more information, I'd encourage you to go to the Delton Glebe Counselling Centre website. So let me tell you a little bit about what we do at Luther in terms of spiritually integrated psychotherapy, because that's often a new term for students. What do we mean by that? Ken Pargament, a leader in this field, defines spiritually integrated psychotherapy as an approach to treatment that acknowledges and addresses the spirituality of the client, the spirituality of the therapist, and the process of change. So it assumes that when people come to psychotherapy, they do not check their belief and values at the door, but rather their beliefs and values are often interwoven with the problems that they bring to psychotherapy, the solutions to those problems, and also the client's larger social and cultural context. So that means at Luther, in all of our teaching and in our clinical practice, we take very seriously the beliefs and values of the clients and how these can be both a resource in the healing and change process, and sometimes where they might also be a challenge to the concerns the client wants to address. This also means that for those of us teaching and learning, we need to be attending to our own beliefs and values. And so in our courses that we teach, we come from that holistic perspective. So no matter whether or not you're looking at different theoretical approaches, such as cognitive behavior therapy, emotionally focused therapy, solution focused, or other courses that deal with particular concerns like trauma recovery or addictions or grief or working with children and adolescents or art therapy, etc. We look at those courses and we teach them from the perspective of keeping the whole person in mind. This means as teachers and learners, we need to attend to all of who we are in our learning together. And so in our learning process, we look at addressing some of the larger questions, the whys, the hows, the wheres that brings us all into this process. Being a professor is a wonderful opportunity to be able to witness the growth and learning of students. It's also a tremendous opportunity to continue to learn and grow as a teacher and as a professor. And that's one of the things I love about teaching. The questions students ask, the challenges that they're facing, keep me thinking, keep me honing the craft of teaching and also of my clinical practice. So it's been a great experience to be with many students over the years as they've learned and taken into their own practice what they've gathered from the degree. This year, because of my increased administrative role, I'm going to have a more limited teaching load. And so I'm really only teaching one course, and that's the practicum course. And I think of it as kind of the capstone course for the MA in Theology in Spiritual Care and Psychotherapy, because it's a 2-term course where students are in a clinical placement. And so we have opportunities to integrate what they're learning in class in the practicum course into their clinical placement, as well as how are they gathering all of the knowledge they've learned in their degree, plus all the knowledge they've brought into the degree and their personal and professional experiences beforehand into their current clinical experience. So it's a really integrative experience where students grapple with things and come together with what is their theoretical understanding of spiritually integrated psychotherapists as they move out after they graduate to either be a psychotherapist or a spiritual care provider. And again, it's a course that is so fun to watch because I can see the learning and growth that happens from September and April and how students become more confident in themselves as a professional. And again, it's part of what leads to my sadness and joy on Convocation Day, because as a professor, it's a real privilege to journey with students. So I love being at Luther, and I love being at Luther because it's a place where I feel challenged, and I've learned so much over the years. And I think it's a place where we can support students as well, to lean into the challenges of their learning, to ask important questions, and to think about what is it that they want to do in their life that will be meaningful, not just a job, but be meaningful. So if you're interested in exploring your beliefs and values and how these integrate into what you're hoping for in your life's work, I'd really encourage you to take a look at what's happening at Luther, both in our courses and in our community life and event. And if you have questions, you could reach me at my email address, klund, Klund, @luther.wlu.ca.